Well, everyone, it's time for us to go and take a look at the Google Pixel 6 Pro and see how this particular phone holds up in 2025. Now, the thing I would definitely tell you about the Google Pixel 6 Pro is that this is one of those devices that I look at and I still think it's a very interesting device. I think it held up fairly well for the most part, but I think Google's done a really good job at making their newer devices. And even though the 6 Pro when it first came out was a pretty big upgrade coming from the previous Pixels, I think nowadays it holds up well in some ways, but it might not hold up the best in other ways as well. So we'll take a look at that throughout this whole entire video. First things first though, if you want to pick up either one of these particular phones, links will be down in the description below. You can get them from there and you can help support the channel at the exact same time. Now, starting off with the outside of the Google Pixel 6 Pro, you can see that on the front side of this particular phone, we're getting a 6.7-inch LTPO AMOLED display. So this thing is a pretty good looking display for the most part, as you can see. It's a fairly large display. It's still one of the bigger size displays you can get on inside of these phones. It's 1440p 120Hz, and it is a pretty good looking panel, right? It's a curved glass display, barely any bezel on this thing. And for the future, like when you're looking at this phone, I would say most people probably wouldn't think this would be an old phone. Like this would be like a 4-year-old phone this year. Most people would probably, like if you gave this phone to people and told them that this phone came out this year, they'd probably be shocked about it because it still looks like it could be a phone that came out this year. It's a very good looking phone from that side, and from that, it definitely gets a thumbs up from me. There's some things that we can hit on later that may not hold up the best with this display, but I still think from this side, it holds up very, very well. On the bottom, getting a USB Type-C port, you're getting nothing really on the sides, just the power buttons and stuff. On the back side, you're getting your standard glass back with a triple camera setup. So this back also gives you reverse wireless charging, which is a really nice feature to have. You're also going through and still maintaining a lot of other things within this type of device too. You're still getting, IP certification. You're still getting really good, build quality for the most part. And I think Google did a really good job with this type of phone when it comes down to it. But there might be some things about this phone that may not hold up the best in some ways. So number one, the Google Pixel 6 Pro, the panel doesn't get like the brightest. It's still a fairly bright display for the most part, but isn't a panel that gets like super bright over time. So that could be one area where you might look at and be like, well, like maybe that could have been a little bit better on this device. So that right there is just one thing, but it's not even that big of a deal. But that's just one area where you might look at within this type of phone. On top of that, with its particular back, it's a standard glass back and not a frosted glass back. So that right there can be kind of an annoyance depending on who you are as well. So if you're going to go through and like look at this type of phone, maybe it could have been nice had you gone through and got a device that was giving you a little bit of a better capability there. Unfortunately, within this type of phone, you're basically stuck at getting just the standard glass back. But overall, still is a pretty decent looking phone, and it definitely gets a thumbs up from me from the build quality standpoint. From a price tag standpoint, this phone is also pretty crazy. Because when it first came out, it was a little bit more expensive, as you can imagine. It definitely wasn't like the cheapest phone of all time. It was $1,000 or close to $1,000 at the time when it first came out. But nowadays, this phone is pretty much worth around $200. That is actually pretty insane. Imagine being able to go through and pick up a phone that's basically costing you like $200 as of this point. That is actually pretty insane, right? And I do think there's a lot of ways you could look at a phone like this and pretty much be like, okay, well, like this phone is a $200 phone, but it doesn't feel like a $200 phone. So in some ways that might be the case, but in other ways that might not be the case, like with the lower dim display and basically missing out on that frosted glass back nowadays. Beyond that though, there's some other big things to keep in mind here too. When it comes down to the camera quality, you're basically going through and getting a triple camera setup. So you're getting a 50 megapixel wide, 48 megapixel periscope telephoto lens, and then a 12 megapixel ultra wide camera. So from that side, you're basically getting this triple camera setup on the back side, and then a single megapixel or single 11.1 megapixel camera on the front. So you're able to do 4K at 60 on the back, 4K at 60 on the front. And this camera, like, it still is like a pretty decent camera for the most part. It's not really that terrible. And if you're going to go through and pick up a camera and pick up a phone, this thing really isn't that bad of a display, or, it's not bad of a camera. So you're still able to go and get like decent videos and decent photos from this thing. But as you could probably imagine, if you're going to go through and like look at some other current generation of phone, well, you're going to be missing out on a lot of things that a majority of phones have nowadays. like 8K capability on the back, or maybe, some other high megapixel capability here and there. Unfortunately, this particular phone is not really going to be giving you like the level of capability that some other phones might be giving you. So kind of keep that in mind. Again, it's not the biggest deal in the world, but once again, if you are going to go through and pick up a device, that could be one thing you might end up seeing here. So just kind of keep that in mind. But I would say the number one area where this phone I look at, and I feel like they could have done a little bit of a better job at, maybe not a better job, but something that could have probably been, is one of my gripes with this phone right now, is its software updates. Now, it's still getting software updates, right? Still getting up to 5 major versions of Android, and right now it's on Android 15. So it is still supported with software, but it's basically the oldest supported, Google Pixel right now on software as far as we know. So that could be somewhat of an annoying thing going on here. If you're going to go through and like pick up a device, that would be something that could end up happening here. Like you might pick up this phone today and realize that, this phone's getting like another year or two of software updates, and that might not be enough for you. I think for a lot of people it might be okay, but if you're wanting a phone that's going to be lasting you a longer period of time, well, that is going to be one of the gripes that you might end up having within this type of phone. On top of that, the battery life itself, it had a pretty big size battery, but I've always had like kind of like average type of battery life within it. It's giving you a 5,003 milliamp hour battery, and that's a really big size battery. That's bigger actually technically by 3 milliamp hours than what we're getting inside of the S24 Ultra. But I've always felt like this battery life, maybe it was because of the chipset this thing had, but it really was kind of like a little wishy-washy for me. It wasn't terrible for me, but it wasn't as great as I thought it was going to be, but still, it's not too big of a gripe in my personal opinion either. But I still enjoy having a phone like this just because it does kind of, it is a really big size battery. And finally, when it comes down to the chipset, it's giving you that Google Tensor G1 chipset inside with 12 gigabytes of RAM. As always, that's a massive amount of RAM, and that's a really good, that's a decent chipset to have inside of a phone like this. But the Tensor chipset was a little bit different than Snapdragon. I would still say the Snapdragon of 2021, the Snapdragon 888 chipset, was one of the better ones they made at the time, and that would have been really nice to have inside of this device. I feel like these first generation Tensor chipsets, and even nowadays, they don't really hold up as great as I wanted them to be, and that is kind of an annoyance, right? It's not the biggest deal in the world, but that would just be one thing you might end up kind of experiencing here. So in my personal opinion, right, if I'm going to go through and use this phone, I think from a performance side, like this phone still holds up well in a lot of ways, but I feel like in some other ways too, like the performance wasn't necessarily the best. And even for a year like 2021, it would have been really nice to have that chipset that the previous phones basically brought. So overall, I will tell you, I think the Pixel 6 Pro, it still is a phone that you can buy because it is still supported with software. But I will be honest, I think there might be some other devices that might be better than this particular device. Number one, I think a Google Pixel 7 Pro and especially the Pixel 8 or 8 Pro are way more worth buying than this particular phone. If you can spend another $200, I would recommend buying a Google Pixel 8 or a Google Pixel 8 Pro. Those devices are killer. They're going to be giving you way better capability when it comes down to it, and it makes a lot more sense to go through and buy one of those types of devices than this one. But I think the Pixel 6 Pro, like, it's still good. It's still giving you, some good capability here and there. But I think that's probably what I'd recommend, is like to buy one of those devices rather than this one. So in terms of that kind of covers it up there. If you have any other thoughts or questions, please let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.